Good evening. I'm Matt Jacobs. I'm director of the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Ocora at Pugh Hall, whether you're attending physically or virtually for tonight's event. Let me begin by wishing you all a Happy New Year. I think I can still get away with that since it's still the first week of classes. I don't think the statute of limitations has expired on that one yet. So welcome all and welcome to 2023. New beginnings also present the opportunity for a moment of reflection on the past, and I want to begin by taking a moment to do so in two respects. First, last week witnessed the 100th anniversary of the Rosewood Massacre, not far from here in Levy County. If you are unfamiliar with what happened at Rosewood, I would encourage you to take a few minutes and look it up. In 1993, David Colburn, who was then professor of history and would ultimately serve as provost at UF, and also as my predecessor here as director of the Bob Graham Center, co-authored a report that led the Florida legislature to recognize the horrible events of January 1923. Even before the Graham Center existed, David's work on Rosewood exemplified the close relationship between academic research and effective civic engagement, public leadership, and public service. Second, this week marks the observance of Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. I want to pause here to acknowledge that Selma, Alabama, the site of the infamous Bloody Sunday confrontation at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, suffered tremendous damage earlier today as a tornado tore through its downtown. Dr. King's efforts in Selma, in Birmingham, in Alabama, in Memphis, in Washington, D.C., and so many other places should inspire all of us to ponder how we might engage, lead, and serve in our own communities, however we might define them. That leads me to tonight's program, which is also in honor of Dr. King. I do want to mention that there will be a Q&A following the talk. We will circulate mics here in the Ocora for those of you who are here. And for those of you attending remotely, you'll be able to submit your questions via the little question bubble in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Following the event this evening, for those of you here in the Ocora, we welcome you upstairs to the O'Neill Room for a reception with a speaker. My final task here tonight is to introduce Sasha Sanin, who's program director in the Office of Black Student Engagement here at UF. Originally from Miami, Sasha graduated from the University of Florida in 2015, earning her degree in telecommunications with a concentration in management. Upon graduation, she served as an Algebra 1 teacher in New Orleans through her commitment to Teach for America. After her time teaching, she returned to school where she graduated from Florida State, that other school down the road, with a Master of Science in Higher Education in May of 2020. That's okay, Sasha, we still respect it. Sasha currently serves as the Program Director of Black Student Engagement in the Center for Inclusion and Multicultural Education. Sasha's been one of the drivers on the steering committee for all of UF's King holiday events, and we really appreciate your work. She's been a great partner as working with Marianne Vernetza and some of the other members of the staff here and some other parts of campus as well. So Sasha, please.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. We are excited to welcome you to this evening's lecture, which serves as one of our many events, a part of the campus's 2023 MLK celebration. The University of Florida Martin Luther King Jr. celebration is a campus-wide initiative and committee within the Center for Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement in the Division of Student Life. The campus-wide celebration brings together many student organizations and university departments to reflect on not only the work and impact of Dr. King, but also to reflect on what is still needed to ensure those efforts remain at the center of today's society. Throughout the week-long celebration, participants and attendees can expect specifically curated events honoring and reflecting on the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how his impact is still felt today. This includes tonight's lecture with Dr. Randal Jelks, a Florida alternative break trip to Atlanta as we serve the Medici Project, where students will immerse themselves into spaces within the community and learn about the history and impact of Dr. King. Our partners within the Brown Center for Leadership and Service will host their annual MLK Day of Service this Saturday, and we're also excited to be supporting the MLK Commission of Florida during their annual commemorative march on Monday, January 16th. The week's events will end with two events: an anti-racism symposium hosted by the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, as well as a closing reception hosted at the Institute of Black Culture, during which we'll hear from our featured keynote speaker, Dr. Courtney Taylor from the African American Studies Program. And we will also hear from our students who participated in our alternative break trip to Atlanta. As you can see, we have a very robust week of programs planned, and we thank you not only for giving your time to be a part of these experiences, but also encouraging our students to engage within these initiatives. The purpose of this celebration is to empower the University of Florida community to see their role in continuing the legacy of Dr. King and to inspire them to use their strengths, passions, and their talents to better our lives and others to impact their local and global community. And we are excited to join you on this journey. I now have the pleasure of introducing Dr. David Canton. Dr. Canton is the Director of African American Studies of the African American Studies Program and an Associate Professor of History at the University of Florida. He graduated with his BA in History from Morehouse College, received his MA in Black Studies from The Ohio State University, and his PhD in History from Temple University. Dr. Canton.
Good evening. I'm here to introduce the speaker this evening. But like any other program, this is a collaboration. It's a collaborative effort. So tonight, I'd like to thank the African American Studies Program, the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, Department of History, the Chief Diversity Officer, and the Center for Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement. Tonight's speaker, Randal Maurice Jelks, is Professor of African and African American Studies and American Studies at the University of Kansas. He's an award-winning author and documentary film producer. He is the author of African Americans in the Furniture City, The Struggle for Civil Rights Struggle in Grand Rapids, Benjamin Elijah Mays, Schoolmaster of a Movement, a biography, Faith and Struggle in the Lives of Four African Americans, Ethel Waters, Mary Lou Williams, Eldridge Cleaver, and Muhammad Ali, and Letters to Martin, Meditations on Democracy in Black America, and a contributor to an edited collection of essays titled 42 Today, Jack Robinson and His Legacy. His other writings have appeared in the Boston Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and Truth Out, as well as national blogs, journals, magazines, and newspapers. Please welcome Dr. Randal Jelks.
Thank you all for inviting a Michigander. I have to say this, I'm a Wolverine at heart. We get beat every bowl game, but I'm still a Wolverine. And yes, I teach it for the Jayhawks, but we win as Jayhawks in basketball, at least. But it's so good to be here with you all. Thank you all for inviting me here and to talk about Dr. King. Perhaps he would not want us talking about him in the way we do, because leaders of that magnitude see themselves as servants. And so I decided to write a book about King because when I was 11 years old, now I'm dating myself now, when I was 11 years old and dinosaurs were still roaming the earth, King was assassinated. And it was one of those awakening moments for me as a youngster. At 11 years of age, I sort of woke up and I started reading the newspaper carefully from then on and having discussions with my elders, particularly my uncle, about what was going on in the world. And one of the things that always struck me about King is that he was also asking for us to think about democracy in terms of inequality, not just the procedural matters of democracy. I think we often miss that point about King, that he's not asking us to just say, I make this move, you make that move, I make that move. But what is the kind of inner side of democracy, that we might respect our neighbors? So I would just want to read you a paragraph of what I wrote out of my book. Democracy is more than consumerist choices that are so easily manipulated and algorithmically controlled. The heart of democracy is the internalization of genuine equality and respect for others, no matter their persuasions or incomes. This respect must be at the core of our being. Democracy is about the recognition that limitations must be placed upon absolute power. The power to enslave, the power to politically dominate, the power to make destructive warfare and murderous genocides. This is the essence of our fight in rebuilding our society's foundation. Our difficult days call for us to summon democracy's winds and fill our lungs with fresh air. I came to write those because I think that we often miss when we are organizing politically. What are we organizing for? On whose behalf are we organizing about? And what does it mean to win? And what does it mean to lose? And is this all a zero-sum game? So I wanted you to think about, particularly students, and I began my own book project called Letters to Martin in a conversation with students at Elmhurst University, just outside of Chicago. And Elmhurst is famous for two brothers that went there. Now, many of you all might not read theologians, but at one time, American population read these two theologians. One was named H. Richard Niebuhr, the other one was named Reinhold Niebuhr. And they had a lot to say about power, and King also read them. And so they invited me to come and speak and join them in their, like this celebration, this MLK celebration. So let's begin. Two words, because King was a preacher. First, from an ancient time, 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. Like good stewards of manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gifts each of you have received. And the second word from King himself, we proclaim devotion to democracy, but we sadly practice the very opposite of the Democratic creed. Martin Luther King Jr. was born 94 years ago. By all biographical counts, he was a sensitive soul, like many of you, with an incisive intellect. Over his growing up years, he discovered that his art and passion was oratory, how to speak, the art of public speaking. Like any great artist, he honed his skills through countless hours of practice. And you all play music, you practice, you practice, you practice. So he practiced. And before television, if you can imagine, y'all, before your handheld devices, the phone that you are constantly on, even in my class, before that, people flocked to hear their imams, their rabbis, their politicians and preachers in congregations and at public gatherings. So public speaking was a big deal. King practiced his craft in his father's church, Baptist churches, as well as forensic competitions in Atlanta and elsewhere in Georgia. He listened to black clergy within the Baptist tradition, preached to the delight of congregations around the country. And this practice skill became a powerful tool. And as he grew up, he discovered that this art could be used to describe the world he occupied, one that was filled with legalized cruelty found in racial segregation, economic inequities, and extrajudicial violence. King came to realize he could use words to paint a picture of the possibilities and the despairing ugliness of the world that he was born into. And he could reshape that world through words. So to make the world more inviting, livable, promising for the black people he lived with and among in community in Atlanta and around the country. So let us imagine for a moment. With a temperament like King, he could have used his artistry to do many other things, perhaps more lucrative ones. During his college years, he contemplated being a lawyer, and surely I would have been intrigued to hear him make a closing argument with that wonderful baritone blues voice he had before the Supreme Court. Or he might have turned into an entrepreneur. You know, a lot of y'all want to be entrepreneurs. Y'all want to sell things, right? You know, you make some money, right? He might have been like George Foreman selling his grill. Or he might have used his oratorical skills demagogically, like politicians with charged rhetoric, making people panic with bromides and confusing citizens over difficult public policy choices that must be made. Could have used that way. We could imagine he might have wanted to do that. Thankfully, he did not. He's used his rhetorical skills as a steward to aid the people of Montgomery, Alabama, and throughout the United States in a struggle to make the country's democracy just a bit more fair, more just for his own community and others. Now, you got to imagine something. If segregation came, there would be, if segregation would still be here, there would be no BMW in Alabama. There would be no Honda in Tennessee. There would be no Toyota. So for all of the people who's tried to shut King up and keep his rhetoric out, they benefit. The steward. He was steward. Thankfully, he used his rhetorical skill to open up the doors, even at the sacrifice of his own self. He wanted to make the rule of law debated transparently and open to all. This was his stewardship. Now, the word stewardship, etymologically meaning the origins of the word, where it begins, is someone who manages the property of others, or a person who serves for the betterment of others. Some of you students are servers. You know, you're stewards. You have to manage for others. A steward does not possess the things she manages. She takes care of them in the same way a gardener prunes and cares for the overall life of the garden. In our capitalist structured society, we speak as though we own everything. But in reality, it's not true. We are all on a timer. All of us. I spent my childhood in New Orleans, and every day I passed cemeteries going to school. And the cemeteries are above ground, you know, because we are truly gumbo in New Orleans. We're a bowl. So every day I walked past school, and I had to realize I'm on a timer. One day somebody's going to be walking past. Who is that old decrepit dude live there, right? So we are all on a timer. And given that reality, one that King himself was acutely aware of, we are here to manage the goodness creatively, and we respectfully. We are here to manage. In other words, we are called to be stewards of things that we will pass on to the next generation, and the next generation, and the next generation. We're all stewards in some senses. But we're fooled sometimes by the language that we all own everything. And I can tell you of now being 66 years of age, you do get old. Your knees will go out. You will have aches some days, and you'll ask where they come from. What will you leave in terms of the legacy generation to come? And this brings me to a point about that ancient biblical text. The entire epistle that was written from is written to people who are engaged in struggle to practice their faith, to live out their lives. The writer, under the guise of Peter, the disciple of Jesus, is trying to assure his congregation and those congregations where these letters were read aloud that hope was not lost. That hope is not lost. And all of us have to remember that. The writer believes that these congregants can remain together as a people charged by their Christian faith to live fruitful lives. These ancient people share a faith that faithful people all over the world experience when great powers come to see that their religious differences are a threat to their rule. All over the world, people are oppressed by their religious faith. The Baha'is, other Christian groupings, the Falun Gong, Muslims, Jehovah's Witnesses, all are banned somewhere in the world and are being persecuted. All. So Peter is trying to convince that there is some grace, there is some hope, and that if these people stayed organized in spite of state persecution, that they would win over the state, the world around them. But the truth is, the Roman government continued to exercise surveillance over these followers and eventually used them as food in a brutal sport of feeding so-called criminals and so-called quislings to the lions. So this writer writes furiously to keep these people together across what is today Western Asia, what we call the Middle East. To keep them stewards of a goodness that they have found in their religious belief. They are referred to as stewards of manifold grace of God. The writer believes that all the congregants have some kind of skill that can be used for greater good of community building. And that is exactly what democracy is all about. It's not just about us individuals. It's about building community. What kind of community do you want to live in? What kind of community do you want to aspire to? And we can all start just by saying good morning to our neighbors. My father used to say, "Did I sleep with you last night if you didn't speak in the morning?" Only my wife can not speak to me in the morning, right? By just acknowledging our simple humanity, that might be a start. That we are all here. I know we all run into class and professors trying to get to class and trying to get from the parking lot to class. But saying good morning might be a start. And this is why we celebrate King Day, not for just one individual. We do not celebrate the singularity of a man. We celebrate all those stewards who stood up for democracy and the protection and the expansion of human rights. It's really important for us to understand that. We celebrate the manifold grace brought to us by Ella Baker, Mary McLeod Bethune, my own New Orleans homegirl, Ruby Bridges, Walter Bergman, Claudette Colvin, Fannie Lou Hamer, Charles Hamilton Houston, Jimmy Lee Jackson, John Lewis, Viola Liuzzo, Thurgood Marshall, Benjamin Mays, Bob Moses, Constance Baker Motley, Pauli Murray, Diane Nash, Rosa Parks, Homer Plessy, A. Philip Randolph, Joanne Robinson, Bayard Rustin, and Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael, Andrew Young, and so many others. We celebrate because people try to expand democracy, which is essentially the golden rule. Our neighbors, the respect of one another as ourselves. And the list is so long. These people all went through, which Shaka Khan says that, what's his name now? Ye? Kanye? All gone through the fire, to the limit, to the wall. We honor them because they are stewards. They pass on something to us, just like Governor Graham, just like passing on something to the next generation. By this, I mean they took whatever they were gifted and developed those gifts to build a more expansive society, not just for themselves, but for a nation and a world. And these are the people in Dr. King's cohort. And they all were a minority within a minority. They were not the majority. In fact, they were infinitesimal. We forget this all the time. We think everybody was out in the civil rights movement. Nah, I was alive. If all the people who said they walked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the bridge would have been destroyed today. They were not the majority. In fact, they were small, overwhelmingly, and they remained dispossessed, fearful. Most of the people, majority of people remained fearful, scared of how the state and white citizens might harm them. Jim Crow laws were punishable laws. You lost your job. You lost work. I remember my grandfather saying to me, you know, those kids shouldn't be out there protesting. They, should be going to school. Anybody who grew up in the South in a certain era in the 1960s, when we still believed in corporal punishment, knew you could not talk back to an elder. Well, I was like, well, Graham, I got another opinion about the whole matter. I was trying to say it coolly without getting slapped. But they fear violence. Jim Crow protected extrajudicial killings and violence with more impunity than Trayvon Martin or Breonna Taylor. And they acquitted people who otherwise should have been convicted of human rights violations. One could get fired from a job for seemingly uttering a word of insubordination. So the majority of folks live with a foreboding and fearfulness. What this creative minority did by taking action was to give the fearful majority the courage to participate in overturning the old rules of society. Rules that dictated who one could love, how one could wear their hair, what country or what religion one held to immigrate in the United States, to wage democratic struggle, in King's estimation, was just a little bit crazy. He says, if our world is to be saved from its pending doom, It will come not through the complacent adjustment of the conforming majority, but through the creative maladjustment of the non-conforming minority. So it never came through the majority. Everybody didn't protest. They might have supported it quietly, but they did not protest. So the task before us today, you are students, is to first hone your gifts. I talk to students because that is your first task. Hone your minds. Go out and do things. See the bigger world. Y'all broke now. You're going to be broke. It's because you're broke, that's the perfect time to go out and see the world. Because you're going to be broke with a family one day. Y'all think that's not true? So while you're single and broke, take advantage of the University of Florida's abroad program. You can live off of some bread and cheese and some wine in France for 6 months. You're young. But you can also learn something. You can travel to West Africa. Now is the time for you to do those kinds of things because you think you're going to have more money, but you really won't. Ask any parent. I mean, you think, I'm going to have some. No, you're going to be broke. So it's now with your broke selves, go out and see the world. We make up in the United States roughly 350 million people in the United States. It's not a lot. The last time I visited Nigeria was 150 million. I think it's more like 200 million. The last time I was somewhere else in Asia, in India, was 1 billion and growing. So we're not the only people on the earth. We have to negotiate with all those other peoples about resources and what's best for them and what's best for us. And if students like yourself don't know anything about the rest of the world, we're in trouble. 350 billion Chinese. Indians are growing even faster. So we have to learn something about this great earth and all of its people, including languages, students. In a school that is located at the intersection of the Caribbean and Latin America, or Spanish-speaking America, or South America, or Central America, you are poised to learn something about your neighbors around you. This is where the stewardship of democracy begins. It is in organizing discussions among students. Remember, Dr. King was 26. He was still writing a dissertation when he came to Montgomery. We forget that. Look at those pictures. He's 26. He looks every bit as 26 years old, right? 13 years later, the years of toil of leadership makes him look much older. It is in evaluating the immediate physical environment that must drive you now. It begins in close readings of the text, trying to understand assumptions. I know your professors like, you have to read more critically. They're right. Because you have to understand what somebody is arguing. It begins by trying to find out your own assumptions. What do they mean? We use the term big data. What does that mean exactly? And who benefits from that? And the list goes on, and they are pressing. They are pressing all over the place, friends. So today, it's your time. Now is your time. Today is your time. Now is the time for you. Now is the time to challenge your politicians. And I don't care who the politician is, to be transparent about their politics. Now is the time. Now is the time to figure out where are we going with medical research in healthcare. Now is the time. These are the issues that you face. Now is the time to think about the ethics of automation and robotics. Now is the time. Not tomorrow. Now is the time. Now is the time to engage these issues of climate change and environmental hazards. So if you're going to take your students out on these trips, take them to the homes where all of this lead is still in the building, from old paints. And all the asthma questions that come up from inner city neighborhoods, that is an environmental issue. Now is the time. Now is the time, friends, right where you are, to engage and think about new alliances among countries and how that will come about. Just because you got a nuke doesn't mean anything anymore. So those other people have nukes. So now is the time to imagine something more positive with arms. And now is the time to build community. I cannot stress this more. We all know about what COVID did, but community was eroding before COVID. Back in the day, Harvard philosopher and sociologist wrote a book called Bowling Alone. Community was eroding before that. And part of the fact is, even with our technology, it doesn't build community. We get virtual bullies. At least in my day, I knew my bullies. I don't know what a virtual bully is, but I knew my bullies, right? I knew I wasn't going around that corner. I'm going to go that way. Now is time, friends. Students. The whole civil rights movement was generated by students. Now is the time. Be serious about what you're doing. Be engaged. Know what you're talking about. You're smart. You're engaged. Have engaged conversation. And most of all, one of the things I want to leave you with is that Dr. King was a great listener. One night in Chicago, he was supposed to be meeting with Mayor Daley, but he was listening to some gang members before he went to meet with the mayor, so he was late for the meeting. Listening to their concerns about what they thought the problems in their neighborhood. We must listen to one another. Yeah, we're going to disagree. I love disagreeing. Back in my day, we had all hellish fights. But we came back to continue the conversation. So now is the time to listen to one another, to disagree with one another with respect and humanity. Now is the time. This is not just about the past. This is about your future and our hopes. And we are handing this thing called democracy off to you all. And you must take it forward. And you must take it forward to build a campus, build your neighborhoods in ways that weren't built before. Now is the time. For all of you all. I want to end this with reading you one small passage from my book. As I wrote about the thought about the ending, how I was going to end this book. And it's called Stone of Hope. I said, one day in the future, the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C. might be a ruin. You know, like the ancient Greek ruins. History is crafted from ruins. Any historian, Dr. Cannon and I know, we are always trying to piece together fragments. We do our best to tell the truth about the past, but we are never sure we are doing it full justice. What I know for certain is that you go beyond any monumental encapsulation in the nation's capital. You are a part of a living democratic tradition that arose from the bonds of enslavement and still continues in the world historical fight to abolish oppression. The English word freedom is not precise. It does not fully convey the transparency we dream of personally or societally. We seek out poets to capture what we mean when we use the word freedom. I love how the poet, who is one of my teachers at the University of Michigan, Robert Hayden, in his poem Frederick Douglass, articulates this freedom. He writes, this man, this Douglass, this former slave, this Negro, beaten to his knees, exile, visioning a world where none is lonely, none hunted, alien, fleshing his dream of a beautiful, needful thing. Hayden envisions that Douglass' life effort was to build the freedom to live without coercive greed, hatred, or violence. A freedom that's structured to enhance self-respect and community. This is the freedom tradition that has evolved over centuries. This freedom tradition was birthed authentically from the 18th century ideology of national republics that belonged exclusively at one time to white property-holding men. In other words, an exceedingly wealthy oligarchy had ultimate say regarding who was a valuable person and a political participant. In their own image, the constitutional framers reimagined the brutal hierarchy in ancient Greece and Rome as democracy. These ancients believed that they alone, as a city-state and as a Roman citizen, were the class suited to govern. The rest, whom they deemed barbarians and enslaved, had no right to govern themselves. Their humanness was acknowledged only so much as it impinged upon the rights of the governing class. Anglo-Americans replicated ancient exclusivity regarding whom the republic served, belonged to, and symbolized. The sovereignty of the people did not mean all people. It meant certain people. And this is how hierarchy has continuously worked in the United States. So we must remember where we came from. I have great respect for the framers of the Constitution. Don't get it wrong. Don't get it twisted. But that's what they thought. But as Dr. King thought, here came a woolly-haired people who injected new meaning into civilization. And that is your goal, your task, today. Thank you. I'm a teacher. I'll take questions.
I thank you for your talk. One of the things I would appreciate if you have any more words for is this idea of how you framed that Dr. King and those working with him helped prepare Alabama, some of these places for more economic prosperity. In my own research, most of my research is centered on Mississippi, and one of my
Well,
questions.
that's a different state altogether.
No doubt. But one of my research questions is how did the places I come from get so poor? And what I found was in my research, it took a diligent effort to make them that way.
Yes.
It was an intended result.
Right.
Would you mind just kind of anything else you'd have to say about this notion of the things that you're talking about will actually bring better economic health also?
Well, specifically in Mississippi's case, the idea of just controlling is a self-defeating strategy for Mississippi. Mississippi largely was agrarian, largely held by a planter class, who were very ingenious, and don't get that. So, the planters, large plantation owners, were very ingenious. But when you only are going to share resources with a small group, then that means that the overwhelming majority can't be participants, and that has been Mississippi's problem for a long time. It still ranks at the very bottom of education. It still ranks in many ways, and it's not a put down of Mississippi. Mississippi, I just drove through Mississippi this summer, and it's still just, I'm always remarkable, the beauty of the state. But we ought to also understand that cotton was not a part of the Florida Panhandle. It wasn't part of Alabama frontier, Mississippi, and those were all planted and changed the ecology of it. So Mississippi still runs upon a hierarchy, and we see this even today with Jackson, Mississippi, with the kind of water crisis that is going on. What state government would want to have their major city have a debilitated water system? And this is a problem of governance. So Mississippi has problems. Tennessee, as the people, particularly in Nashville, tell me, we're still the Athens of the South. We still think about the kind of greater good. So there are, the South is many Souths, right? I mean, I'm from Louisiana, and it ain't that far. We practice corruption with just great beauty. It's a beautiful thing, the corruption in Louisiana, but it has a cost to it. It has a cost to what's going on in the Mississippi River. Has a cost to its citizens. I have relatives who live in what is called Cancer Alley, and it has an economic cost. This is what I mean by transparency. This has cost to everybody. We have healthcare issues galore. Mississippi's healthcare system is almost nearly bankrupt. So we have all these issues are before us. However, the civil rights movement did open up for companies that would have not come there, and a Stanford economist, I'm not that original, a Stanford economist wrote a wonderful article about the South after the Civil Rights Movement and why that was an important arena. So in places like Birmingham up to Tuscaloosa, you see the car plants, and even making it electric cars. There's still problems with that because big manufacturers still rather than not pay people decent wages. There's still problems with that. But let me say, it is a far cry better than 60 years ago.
Hello.
Hi.
No. Thank you for the motivation and speaking to the students directly and letting us know that the time is now. I really appreciated that. I needed to hear that. With that being said, I wanted to ask about microaggressions and when creating a better community and following a stewardship like Martin Luther King did, how do we necessarily fight against the forces that are working against us but aren't as visible? And especially in the classroom, like as black students at UF, there's plenty of things that we experience that don't get talked about. So I wanted to see how we could continue to build a better community while also protecting ourselves from those microaggressions.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of us who are professors. So first of all, I'm going to claim my professor class here. All have our biases. Every professor got their biases, and sometimes we don't even know them till a student comes along and says, "Well, I don't think I agree with that," and it gets you to thinking. So that's first thing is on the topic or the way you feel something has been interpreted. And by raising your hand and saying, that means something totally different to me. Remember, I went to a majority white institution. Oftentimes, I was the only minority student in class. Sometimes it was terrifying, but I had to say, no, sir, I don't agree with that. There's another way of looking at this, and also seeing that, making sure that, and with your fellow students. The problem for many people is that you go to college, you don't know. You've never lived with somebody who looks different than you. The way the United States is laid out, most of us don't live like we live in New York City and rubbing up against each other on the subway, right? We live in our own communities. So when we get to college, first of all, college is a shock for most people. Because now first time you're encountering people who have different values, different understandings, different beliefs. The best thing is to start being a little bit humility and asking people about what's going on. The second thing is, I learned something as a college student. I went home with I had a triple. Back in the day, we live y'all live rich. Y'all college students live rich. Y'all got TVs and refrigerators. We was just trying to make a loft and out of bunk beds. But I went home with two of my roommates. They were white. One was rich. We went home with this dude. He was literally rich. I'm like, oh, dude, you paying for the pizza from now on. I went home with the other student. He was like mine. And then they came home with me to the south side of Chicago. And they were shocked. They first saw my two roommates and said, we the only white people in this store. I said, well, that's how I feel at college. Because you don't have that experience one to another with each other, right? They like my home better than they like their home because, I got that loud. My family's all from Louisiana. They loud. They coming over. They talking. and it's Sunday, and it's eating, and it's crazy, and it's mayhem, and people are hugging. And they were kind of, like my big fat Greek wedding, they kind of stayed. And so they were like, oh man, your folks are great. People hugging each other and yelling at each other and entering each other's conversation. So people don't know each other. So you try to take a moment to say, where you from? I mean, no, where you really from and where I'm from, because most of us got the same issues. Resentments, family issues, drama. Even rich people got drama. So that's one way of it. The other way is to ask the Office of Diversity and Inclusion to hold conversations with your faculty so that they can hear a little bit better and see a little bit better. The students in your class. Y'all different. I grew up with Great Depression parents. They ain't had no feelings. They just had duty. You get up, you do this, you do that, do the other. Now I got to listen to students with feelings. I feel, Professor. I don't care. And what I want to say is like with my parents, I don't care what you feel. You got a duty. You got a responsibility. You got to get up and do it. But that's a different generation. So I even have to, it's like, oh, okay, let me try to find some inner feelings here. Because, I grew up with them parents who they ain't have no feelings. Like, why, sleeping in, what does that mean? You can't sleep in. It's work. It's just work. I mean, so I think it is, you can microaggressions, people don't even often know what they're saying. So you like, really? Did you really mean that way? Because they take the attitude of their parents. We all come with the attitude of our parents to college, right? And then we have something that hit us that is totally different. So I feel you. I hear you. I think you have some people all around that you can take that to. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Professor, thank you for coming and for your remarks today. It was a great exhortation to be engaged in, in popular civics, which I think King would agree with. You gave a lot of different areas that were pressing problems where you urge, I believe, students and others to get engaged and to do things now because the time is now. I'm curious, when I look back on King, one reason why he focused on the timeliness of engagement and gave that phrase, the time is now, is because he felt that, in my view, racial progress was so necessary in America that America would not be able to overcome its own self-created crisis without people being engaged in that right away. So that urgency has waned when we start talking about race matters and race issues, I would say. But I'm curious, in your opinion, of all the areas that you talked about, whether it was, the medical, medical provision of medical services, or whether it was the environment, economic development, things of that nature, which of those questions are ones that you really see the same kind of corresponding urgency that King saw in the civil rights struggle that students should really get engaged with now because it might be too late?
That's a really interesting and well thought out observation about King. But you remember King, what I note here, King didn't just see those all these things as disconnected. So strikingly, he gives a speech before the one union in Minnesota, and he's already talking about automation in 1961, 62. and what that will mean for black working people. So these are already in his head, already early on, as these are kinds of questions that have to be thought through. Of course, he wasn't thinking about the environment as such, but later Ralph Abernathy and all of those other people will ask the question about what does it mean to go to the moon, and we have not solved the problems here on Earth. As speak, are we just going to carry those problems elsewhere? So we don't all have to think of them all at once, and all of them have consequences regarding race and gender. So I don't know. Some of you might have seen on Netflix Descendant, which follows Zora Neale Hurston's a story about the Clotilda. But what's the striking part of that is, and I've been trying to write an op-ed and nobody wants to take it, but the striking thing about that piece is the environmental impact all around that community, much like my own relatives living down Cancer Alley in New Orleans. The environmental impact has an impact on diverse groups of people, and it affects people badly. When we moved to Chicago, I discovered there's a Gary, Indiana, where U.S. Steel used to be. It still is, but a shell of itself. Way the wind blew on most of the working people. But there's a little section of Gary called Miller that's on Lake Michigan where the managers live, and the wind, uniquely didn't blow that way. So you could have a nice beachfront house. So we have to think about these things and what those diverse impacts mean on people, right? I mean, so Gary was a working class community even before the Jackson 5, and Joe Jackson lived there. Y'all, just if y'all want some trivia to play, the Jackson 5 are from Gary, Indiana, and they got the song Going Back to Gary, which they never did. But to just understand that these all have diverse impacts on communities. So you have to choose your issue. I don't think we can all do every issue, but we have to choose them in ways that we see the impact on what's going on. What's striking to me is the sheer decline in the number of men going to college, right? Look around your classrooms, right? So that means your future leaders will be women. And that's not, I'm not saying that as a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, because y'all quote me, that the Jelks, I'm saying that we have all kinds of ways that gender inequalities will occur, will happen, and it's why we go to school, is to at least begin to anticipate what is going on in the world around us. Now, we may disagree how to solve that, but the beginning of that is to have that discussion about what is going on around us and around the world in these. And it's not just germane to the United States. Fortunate enough for me, I get to go a lot of different places in the world. I mean, that is a blessing of my career. But you see these things, and this is a very important thing for us to think about. What does community mean? What will this mean for all of us? So I'm saying pick your where you want to put your effort into. A. Philip Randolph said, I want to be a labor leader, right? And people need jobs. And my grandfather, again, one of my grandfathers said, I thought A. Philip Randolph, who was a great black labor leader in the 1920s and 30s, who led the Pullman Porters to get pay. My grandfather was a red cap at the New Orleans train station. 40 years he carried other people's luggage. And he would always say, Mr. Randolph helped me get my pension. And I thought Mr. Randolph was somebody who went to his Baptist church. Right? And then one day I was like, oh, he's talking about A. Philip Randolph, right? So labor, whatever it is that you're going to do it and be a part of it and do it well, but don't see it disconnected from that environmental thing. Maybe if you're going to be an engineer, ask questions. And if you're going to be a civil engineer, take art history so you can know something about beauty. Oh yeah, I was in France. I mean, they built some of the beautiful bridges. I was like, in the United States, it's just like, hey, it's practical. It's like, give me a little beauty when I'm driving, right? So think about all of these things. That's why I'm focusing on you students because, sir, I didn't get your name, but you're right. But these issues all have impacts and drastic impacts on all of us. Mass incarceration was predominantly, although not exclusively, attack on males. What does that mean? So we all have to think about these things. Any other questions? I love students, and anybody who's asked a question is a student.
Thank you. So earlier you mentioned that we have to question our assumptions, and I was wondering how specifically you would suggest to do this, especially for questions that are like, for assumptions that are deemed as acceptable by society at the time.
Well, I knock the Greeks a lot. I do, but one thing about Plato is like, he's got this analogy about the cave. And these people in the cave. Now, when I first took philosophy, I asked my professor, well, like, why didn't they just get up and walk out the cave? Right? But that's just, and they just kept seeing the shadows. So that means that we have to learn the questions. What we see is absolutely real, the way we see it. In the 17th century, the microscope changed whole realities. Suddenly you get like, man, I got things living on my skin. And they having a good time. So the assumption is that we're here alone, that we are self-autonomous, could be questioned. So we have to engage in that kind of, this is why you go to college, a highbrow, you got this moment to be broke and engage in some real great conversations about things, So enjoy your brokenness, because, you got student loans. You're going to have them student loans to pay now. They're coming back for you. But that's all right. Now, maybe you have one of those great scholarship schools, and listen, friends, I graduated, thank you, Lord. A lot of y'all, y'all trying to be cum laude and all this other stuff, summa cum laude. I just graduated, thank you, Lord. Yeah. I was so happy to get out. And then I found myself when I got out of school, my mind finally caught up. But I was, thank you, Lord, because that degree, thank you, Lord, degree, right? But what I did do in college was hang around people who read all kinds of different stuff and talked and talked and talked, and that's important. And because and I learned an enormous amount. And that's what you're supposed to be doing too, right? And going out, and I always give assignments to go outside the classroom. Go to a museum somewhere. Go somewhere else. That's how you learn. And that's how you educate yourself. Not just in the class. I'm on the side of the professors. I'm in the classroom. I know we only can give you a little bit, but there's so much more we're trying to. But we're also trying to, at our best, is trying to give you a language so that you can engage other people with. That's what we're at our best trying to do. You know, at our worst, we don't like grading your papers. And any professor says that they like grading, stand up. They ain't gonna stand up. Thank you very much. You all have been wonderful. I have another question here. Oh, all right.
Hi, I'm Kiara Thompson.
Hi,
Nice
Kiara.
to meet you. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for giving
Well,
me.
thank you for the wonderful people who invited me.
Thank you, Dr. Ken. Thank you, African American Studies, Spock, and everybody. Thank you for coming. You really gave me a different perspective on Dr. King tonight, and it's just you gave me a really different perspective, and it's common in my generation of Black kids for people to feel like Dr. King was sort of a hindrance to our community.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, just because they feel like we can get into that, but they feel like that. So I feel like you brought up really important points about inner quality, and I was wondering what is something that you've learned from Dr. King that you think we could use today to move our democracy towards inner quality?
That's good. Great question. Love, I'm gonna steal her. You come to Kansas. I understand, but players can transfer now. So first of all, Stanford University has all the King's papers online. So you can go online and dig in and just figure out what he would ask or see his letter that he's writing to his mama. That's important stuff because they're human. All these people are human, right? How you going to break some news to his daddy? He's got a strong-willed father. He's like, oh, man, I've got to talk to mama. I'm going to tell dad, I got a C- in this class. I mean, really, Stanford has those papers. So you can see the humanity of people and trying to come to make a decision about what direction you want to go. Reading notes, all those things. Nobody in history is absent of struggle or issues and so forth. King was frail, like we all are. Didn't let that stop him. And that's the difference. Didn't get so in his head that would stop him from doing what he needed to do. I mean, can you imagine all those opinionated leaders he had to work with? Jesse Jackson, Andrew Young, Diane Nash, and they was all bosses, right? So you got to be patient and listen to all them people and their ideas and so forth. Those are qualities that you might learn from. You may disagree with nonviolence. That is your absolute right. But you got to understand why he's arguing for nonviolence. Like, what do we do in an age of nuclear armament? Do we settle the problems of the world like we did in World War II? Or is this going to go all out of control? That's what he's thinking about. Are we going to just wipe ourselves out? So give people their context first. Now, you can still disagree with them. Certainly, Malcolm X disagreed with him. So did my grandmother. You put your hands on me, it's going down. Right? What they would tell my grandmother, like, no, you can't be out here protesting. You can cook for us. You can do other things for us. We ain't letting you out here on the street because you could be fighting people. That was a strategy, right? So you have to think about that. And they learned to dramatize what they wanted to. They planned to go to Birmingham. They planned to go to Selma because they knew the sheriffs were just some people out of television. You couldn't cast them any better. I mean, they were shrewd enough to think about, they learned from the Albany experience, where the sheriff just calmly arrested everybody and put them in jail. So, okay, all right, listen. We need to show people what the segregation is about. Where can we do it? Bull Connor. Any guy go name of Bull Connor, made for television. All right? Sheriff Jim Clark, made for television. Right? So you have to give these people their credit. They're smarter, wiser than you might have thought. And again, you can still come to disagree with it. They were sexist. And I write this in my book. Right? King's my dad's generation. Those dudes were sexist. Right? They were. No defense. That was a flaw. That was a real major flaw, because there would be no civil rights movement without women. Right? No. Right? None. Because most of the dudes like leading, but the women organize. It's like my youngest sister. She could not get in trouble for the life of me, because by the time she snuck out the house, she had called all our girlfriends, and they had the story all in a circle. Now the brothers, we just stupid, but they were all organized. I finally said, "Friend, how do you do this?" Well, we got our stories. So I'm over at Jane's, I'm over here. I'm like, so that's the men. So, we're kind of slow. But there would be no movement without women. And so women are at the forefront of this democratic struggle. And it's welfare mothers who are teaching King about the poor people's movement. It was called the National Welfare Organization. So you have to understand that none of these people, they are being held accountable. And one of the things I would like all of you to do is continue to hold your leaders accountable. I worked on the first campaign of a politician named Harold Washington, who was the first black mayor of Chicago. And it was a grand campaign. At the end of the campaign, Washington gathered all of the campaign volunteers in the room. And he said, "Y'all gonna have to hold me accountable." He says, "I've got different interests pulling me different ways." Right? So I need you to say, so when the corporate life of Chicago says to him, "Well, you got to do this and give us this tax break," I need 10,000 people in front of the mayor's office, and I got to say to the corporate people, I really can't give you all that. We have to hold our politicians accountable because they are pulled a lot of ways. And money influences them a great deal. And that's not new. We talked about Mississippi, planter culture. The planters ran the state government. So you got to have a balance of in the state government of people who have different interests than just the people who have money. Because they'll drive you off a cliff. Because people think money answers everything. Any other questions? Y'all have been wonderful. I'll come back to Florida any day.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jelks. Here's a gift for you, parting gift. And for those of you, thanks for coming out. Again, I'm the director of the African Studies program, and some of these issues, all of these issues, we talk about in our classes with our program. In fact, will my colleagues from my African Studies program please stand up? Please stand up. That's Eminem, right? All right, so they talk about these issues, and we thank. So next, we'll be going upstairs to the O'Neill Reading Room, is where the reception is upstairs. And look forward to coming up, continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.